Hello and welcome. This is the FIT4PRIVACY Podcast, the podcast for professionals. I'm your host Punit Bhatia. In this podcast, we talk to influencers so that you get to listen and learn from their experiences and thoughts. Remember, this is not legal advice, and if you need one, please contact a professional with your situation. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. This is the FIT4PRIVACY Podcast, and I'm your host Punit Bhatia. Today we have a very special episode. Special because GDPR completes 2 years, and we are going to look back and find out what has happened in these 2 years. So let's look at a perspective of GDPR at 2 years. But how do we look at 2 years of GDPR regime? So we are going to look at 5 different things. Why was GDPR such a big thing? Second, what are the positives that have come through in last 2 years? Third, what challenges have remained even after 2 years? That is, what is making the business leaders and privacy leaders still question and still struggle? And how can any discussion on GDPR be complete without talking about fines? And what about enforcement? So let's talk about that as our fourth topic. And last but not the least, we will talk about the conclusion, that is the way forward. What do we conclude from the last 2 years, and how do we look forward into the way that is waiting us? So let's get started. By the way, for those of you who do not know me, I am Punit Bhatia. I help privacy professionals and business leaders to make privacy simple and manageable. I help them by being an author who writes books, by being a public speaker, and also by providing advisory and consultancy services. So, GDPR at 2, why was it actually a big thing? Well, to start with, GDPR is a regulation. This is the foremost difference between GDPR and the previous legislation, that was the directive of 1995. But what does regulation and directive mean? Well, in GDPR terms, or rather EU terminology, a directive is a goal that member states must achieve by devising their own local laws, while they have a lot of flexibility in taking the goal and making it local law. On the other hand, a regulation is a binding act that must be applied across EU member states in its entirety. This means member states have limited flexibility, and regulation is a law that is effective in all member states. This meant privacy laws across EU member states would be very similar, with some exceptions that are allowed in GDPR. So this differentiation, that the previous directive allowed or asked each member state to pass their own laws, vis-a-vis GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is a binding act, means it is directly applicable and allows for lesser flexibility. And that leads us to the second point on why GDPR was a big thing. It gave rise to something called the one-stop shop. Of course, by having a regulation, it meant that all the member states will have a uniform privacy law. But it also meant that organizations and individuals that deal with cross-border member states, that is privacy issues related in multiple countries. Take an example, there's an organization which is operating across multiple member states. Previously, it needed to comply and liaison with all the member state supervisory authorities. But with GDPR, it is possible to nominate one lead supervisory authority and let all privacy related matters for that organization be discussed with the lead privacy authority or lead supervisory authority. The same also applies for individuals, that is, you can go to the local supervisory authority of your member state and hand over the case or the complaint and let them take care for you, even if the company or the organization is operating in another jurisdiction, meaning another member state. The third dimension on which GDPR kind of created that big thing or big discussions was 72-hour data breach notifications. Now, GDPR required that personal data breaches be notified to supervisory authority, and that too within 72 hours of becoming aware of such a breach. This was new, this was challenging, and this meant a lot of organizations were panicking, and of course, the media as well. This was perceived to be a very strict requirement, even though some countries like the Netherlands already had mandatory notifications of data breaches. And if this was not enough, we also had the accountability principle. That is, for the first time, the EU data protection legislation mandated that it is the responsibility of an organization to demonstrate compliance with the principles in GDPR. That is, it is the organization that is to demonstrate how it is lawful, how is the purpose limitation being achieved, and data minimization or accuracy and everything else. And this burden or this responsibility on the organization meant some organizations were panicking, or it was new, let's put it like that. Again, GDPR came along with significant fines, big fines, 4% of global revenue or 20 million euros. This meant a small organization which would, let's say, earn about $500,000 or 1 million euros could still technically get a fine of 20 million euros. And this created a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, saying if an organization earning 1 million or €500,000 per year now gets fined for 20 million euros, they will go out of business. And this there's this scaremongering or attention in the media on whether the law would kill small businesses also created a lot of buzz. While the aspiration of GDPR was to harmonize the privacy compliance laws, modernize the practices, because the world had changed from 1995 to now, because between 1995 and now, the world changed in terms the internet was almost everywhere. There were new smartphones, smart devices, and everything was becoming a digital, or we even are digital entities, digital profiles. So, putting the onus of compliance with organizations, putting authorities with powers like never before, and empowering individuals with rights and means to question organizations meant organizations suddenly feel they have to do something. They felt there is something that is needed retrospectively. Because they were feeling like free hand when it comes to processing of personal data, but now they need to take care of all these principles and laws. So these are some of the few reasons why GDPR became such a big thing. So now that GDPR has completed 2 years, what are the positives that have come through? In last 2 years, initially the reaction was, it is a compliance thing, we have to spend a lot of money. But if we look back now, or especially in last few months, there have been studies and there have been reports that GDPR is a business benefit. That is, organizations have started to feel and believe that privacy compliance brings them positive returns. A recent study by Cisco indicates that 40% of organizations confirm that they have achieved or received benefits at least twice their privacy spend. Yes, you heard it right. Twice their privacy spend. The same study also states that organizations having more than 10,000 employees have received or incurred benefits worth $4.1 million. Well, that's big. And 17% of them say they have estimated value from privacy compliance investments at about $10 million. So what about the smaller organizations? The smaller organizations size between 250 and 499 employees, which I would generally refer to as medium-sized enterprises, they also claim that estimated benefit for them has been around $1.8 million. So as time goes by, privacy compliance is likely to become a key brand and reputation differentiator. So this is going to be the one big positive coming out of GDPR. Another thing which GDPR has achieved is or has done is it has put privacy as a topic on table. That is, if you go to a boardroom, go to a conference, or even in public, every time the question is this compliant with GDPR? And that is a huge, huge positive. If the objective of GDPR was to put citizens in control, then the first step was to have a proper discussion and debate on the topic where it matters. And in my opinion, this has been a key benefit that has been realized. Like it or not, this is being discussed. Another dimension is the strong awareness amongst public and media. What I mean by this is it is fascinating wherever you go, wherever you talk, public is talking about GDPR. Take the example of pandemic. I mean, people are struggling with COVID. People are struggling for life and death. But the debate is this GDPR compliant, or of course for sensationalization? Is this the end of privacy? Can we do this? Can we do tracking? Can we do monitoring? Is this GDPR compliant? So every time the discussion is it privacy compliant or not? Is this allowed or not? And that is a very good sign, because if GDPR can hold through these challenging times, it will be very exciting times. Of course, Article 5 in GDPR allows for processing and even special powers to governments in case of a pandemic or epidemic. Another thing is the global impact of GDPR, which is a big, big positive. What I mean by this, the EU legislation required companies across the world to be compliant with GDPR if they were to provide services in EU, that is, serve EU residents with products and services. But the consequence of GDPR has also been that around 142 countries across the world have passed privacy laws that are similar to GDPR, similar in essence that the principles on which GDPR recommends to process personal data are being used by these laws or being upheld by these laws. So this has led to some of us, or especially the supervisory authorities, to referring to GDPR as the referring the GDPR as the gold standard when it comes to protecting privacy. Another positive has been that privacy is now a function in most companies. What I mean by that, most organizations are now having a privacy department. At least 75% surveyed by CPO magazine tell that they have at least one privacy professional on board, and 25% them say they have a team of more than 10. So most medium or large size organizations are having a privacy officer and or a privacy department, while the small sized are starting to look at something called a fractional privacy officer. That means you don't need a DPO, but you have somebody who is providing you privacy advice as and when you need on a recurring basis, and that's a model with which small and medium sized companies are now going with. The creation of these privacy departments has meant a lot of jobs have been created, certifications are being produced, and consulting firms have made a lot of money. Even the software vendors have started to come up and offer automation. So I have not touched all the benefits, but at a broad level, you get a sense that GDPR is likely to grow and have more impact in coming years, but the signs, the indications have already started to show. So what have been the GDPR challenges? Are there challenges? Yes, of course. You talk to anybody and you hear a lot about where are they struggling with GDPR. The first and foremost being it's a framework, and framework means interpretation. By being a framework, GDPR has put the onus on interpretation with the privacy professionals. This is sometimes very annoying for business or even privacy professionals, because business or technology people sometimes ask for binary inputs. Binary meaning clear answer, yes, no. Is delete delete or is delete soft delete? Tell me clearly and approve it. But that does not work with a framework like legislation, because framework like legislation requires interpretation, and interpretation requires a very deep understanding. Now, not everyone can have deep understanding, and this becomes a big challenge and creates frustration amongst business and privacy professionals, because business people like to know what to do while privacy leaders like to know what to recommend, and both areas tend to be gray. In that, we come to the second challenge, that is multiple guidance from authorities. In an interpretative law, we need guidance. There's no doubt about it. But as we need guidance, we need clear or one guidance. And what has happened? More than one authority has come up with guidance on the same topic. And that does not help. Does not help because it creates confusion, even if it's a little bit here and there. It defeats the purpose of one law across member states. So having multiple guidance or guidance has created a big challenge. Take the example of pandemic. Almost all EU member states have issued COVID related guidance. One says one thing, another says another thing. Yes, of course, everyone says you can process personal data. GDPR is not a hindrance, but it allows you to process data with conditions. But it is the conditions in which the fine differences in one and the other guidance create an issue. If that was not enough, what we have seen in last few years is one activity is now being processed or executed under multiple legitimate bases. What I mean by that, the freedom to make our own interpretations has meant personal data for an activity like marketing is being done under different legitimate bases. One company is saying it should be under legitimate basis called legal interest or legitimate interest, while the other is saying I will do it based on consent. Now, is this right or is this right? We don't know. Both are right because the law allows us to choose either in function of various other factors, and this leads to open questions. I hope clarity and consensus will emerge, but for now this is a big challenge. Another factor is the DPO role. The DPO role is meant to help organization govern privacy compliance in a structured manner. However, the breadth and the depth of the role means that a DPO needs to know IT, business, HR, all aspects of business, stakeholder management, law, communication, and so on. And that is not easy. It's very difficult to find people who know everything. And this means some companies are now struggling to have what we call a DPO or a privacy department, while some are trying to find the best in class DPOs. And this does not help. And this also creates a challenge wherein companies are looking at ways on how to implement policies and procedures across business functions. This is one of the biggest challenges that the CPO magazine states in their assessment. If this is not enough, people like to say technology leads and laws follow. That is what happened. From 1995 to 2016, the technology evolved and the law evolved after 20 years or 23 years. Now, same thing seems to be the case for those who love to talk about artificial intelligence, robotics, or innovation. It is believed that these have enormous potential and there is no doubt about it. But is there clarity in the law? And we have two views. On one side, people are saying, well, GDPR is sufficient. It provides you principle-based approach, a framework, and you can look at it and find answers. While on the other hand, the detractors or the, people who are not in favor of GDPR, they are saying it is not clear, we need clear guidance, and that is not making life easier for professionals. Similarly, as there is shortage of good skilled professionals or skills are expensive, Small companies are struggling. They don't have the means to hire consultancy firms or define or set up a privacy department. So, what do? Some of them are waiting and some of them are hiring fractional privacy officers. Access to good resources means smaller companies will take time before they start compliance journeys. I looked through websites of about 150 marketing and advertising companies, small companies, with less than 200 staff. And I find that about 30% of them do not even have a privacy statement on website. What to talk about privacy compliance? What all that means is there are also some practical issues. If smaller companies are struggling with practical issues, DPOs are struggling with practical issues, there are also issues in terms of what to do in some simple scenarios. If a data subject asks me a right for access to information, what do I have to share? Yes, there has been guidance, but people are still confused what they have to give and what they don't have to give. Similarly, is deletion needing to be permanent or is something like put beyond use sufficient? Similarly, about data breach reporting. Do we have to report? Do we not have to report? You talk to 5 DPOs and you get 5 different answers on the same breach. And that does not help. I think with time, people will gain maturity, experience, and we will have examples based on actions from authorities. But for now, life is not easy. It has a lot of challenges. So if there are positives, there have remained challenges. But let's move on to our next topic, that's what enforcement actions have been taken. This is very interesting. How can we not have talk about enforcement if we are talking about GDPR? Because people expect fines, huge fines. But what's the purpose of GDPR to issue fines? Let me give you an analogy. When we are driving on the road, there happens to be a new camera and a new red light. Of course, other way around. First the new red light and then a new camera. But people never say the camera and the red light are there to issue fines so that government can make more money. No, people generally say now that the red light is there, we must follow the rules because there's a camera, we might get penalized. So the essence of red light or the camera was that traffic goes on smoothly and follows the rules and there are lesser accidents. So why should it be different for GDPR? Why do we expect GDPR to be only a camera which will issue fines? While it has the rules, it has the red lights and the green lights and the orange lights. I think there needs to be better understanding that the essence of GDPR is to ensure processing of personal data in line the principles of GDPR. Talking about enforcement, there have been 273 fines, some small or mostly small, but a few $100 million or euro fines or even more, but they are handful. Now, people who wanted to see blood, they believe not enough has been done, but we have to understand the purpose of law was never to issue fines, but to drive privacy compliance or make companies follow the rules. The 4% was an upper limit for repeat negligent behavior, not usual. And the function of a data protection authority is to ensure compliance, while issuing fines is one part of it, not the only part. So will we see large fines? I don't know. But in my opinion, I would rather see, and in fact, I believe the authorities would rather see companies complying with privacy laws than companies being issued with fines. However, what will happen? I think both will happen, both will coexist. Most companies would follow the law, some will not, and those some will be penalized. And some of them, when they will not act, even after fines, would be issued larger fines. Will they be 4%? I don't think so, but I don't know. So that is about enforcement. So we've talked about why GDPR was a big thing, what were the positives, what were the challenges, what is the story on enforcement, but what can we conclude from these 2 years? What is it that we can say will happen in future? I think first and foremost, privacy is here to stay. 2 years ago, privacy was not the norm, but now going forward, it is the new normal. If discussions on tracking as part of pandemic are any indication, then it is clear that privacy is here to stay. And it will only get more and more embedded in the corporate world. Rather, instead of being a European issue, it has become a global international issue. Everywhere there's talk about enforcement, everywhere there's talk about privacy laws. Another thing that will happen going forward is there will be more and more automation. Most companies have focused on becoming privacy compliance by operationalizing policies, governance, and processes. But as we look ahead, there will be automation, there will be use of artificial intelligence, predictive approaches, so that rather than reactive responses to data breaches, we can be proactive. And I think automation would increase. As automation increases, there is likely that maturity of companies will increase. And as maturity increases, they would like to differentiate themselves. They would like to differentiate in terms of demonstrating by focus on certifications, self audits, or external audits, to differentiate, to create an environment wherein they will go to customers and say, we are privacy compliance, please trust us. And as that trust happens, there will be more and more trust and more brand recognition and more value to companies which are privacy compliant. While all this happens in context of GDPR, there are likely to be more privacy laws across the world. Yes, in last 5 years, there have been more privacy laws than ever before, but I think the next 5 years will also have the same thing. If we look at India, Pakistan, Thailand, these are the countries who are in final stages of drafting or finalizing their laws. Many states in US are looking at passing laws. Brazil has, of course, it's delayed the implementation of its law, but I think it's going to come in 2021 sometime. While in US we will see state-wise privacy laws in the short to medium term, I think later we will also see a harmonized law, probably across countries or at least in US. This differentiation in laws or multiple laws will create variable requirements, and those variable requirements would create a big challenge for companies that operate in multiple countries. So I do see EU adequacy list getting adapted and broader adequacy guidelines. As all this happens, new standards would emerge. Already we have ISO 27701 as the new standard. We are also having NIST as a framework, and as these things happen, privacy compliance or certifications will become a source of brand differentiation. A study by Cisco already shows that 82% of organizations view privacy certifications like ISO 27701 as a determining factor on whether to select a product or vendor in the supply chain. It will become sooner a very mandatory requirement that is considered a basic hygiene factor. So in short, like it or not, GDPR, and not only GDPR, more privacy laws are here to stay. We can debate, we can like, we can dislike, we can question, but the laws are here and we need to comply. So we are better off taking a pragmatic approach to complying with privacy laws from a long-term perspective. As we do so, we should understand that compliance is an ongoing journey, so do not look at it as a project that is done and completed, but something that is carried along through the journey, through the business, because as business keeps changing, so will your compliance. So have a safe privacy compliance journey, and ladies and gentlemen, this was GDPR at 2 perspective, a special episode of the Fit for Privacy podcast. I hope you liked this effort. If you like it, please do click comment, like, share, or if you don't like it, still please comment, because your comments will help me understand what you like to listen, where I can improve and become better to serve you better. If you like to engage with me, talk to me, please email me at info@punitbhatia.com, INFO, or connect with me on LinkedIn. If you like to suggest someone who can be a guest on the Fit for Privacy podcast, please email me or again reach me out at LinkedIn. Your likes, your shares, and your comments are always appreciated. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was the Fit for Privacy podcast. From here on, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to having you next time on another episode of the Fit for Privacy podcast. Stay safe and stay blessed.